What's good, YouTube? Welcome to part 2 of the Whatcast Hot Takes video on Magore's Fiends for Warhammer Underworld Shadespire. Now this time around we're going to be looking at their unique factional objectives and how they're going to play as a faction and how they're going to affect your meta going forward even if you're not playing as them. Let's move right in. Alright, the first card we have is All the Better to Slay Them. Score this immediately if all friendly fighters, at least 3, are adjacent to a different enemy fighter. Okay, you already had my attention with score this immediately. That makes me okay with 1 glory point for the win. The actual aim here is going to actually be very strongly synergistic with how your warband plays. For my interpretation of the hero cards that we saw in the last video, this is very much a faction that wants to directly get into combat and probably take a lot of damage, but also return a lot of that damage and to weather most of that damage. Basically, you want to be a brick, but you want to be a brick in your opponent's face. Downside of this is not that all of your friendly fighters have been, or that all your friendly fighters are adjacent to an enemy fighter, which is where you want to be anyway, but they have to be adjacent to a different enemy fighter. Now, that's not to say that if your fighter is adjacent to 2 enemy fighters, that messes you up. They just have to be adjacent to that different enemy fighter in addition to whichever other fighter they're adjacent to. Where this becomes difficult is if your opponent is playing a faction where they don't have a lot of figures in the warband. Right off the bat, you have 3 Blood Warriors and an awesome doggo. So you are, until you lose a fighter, you are not going to be able to successfully play this against Stormcast Eternals, Farstriders. You won't be able to play it against any of the 4-man warbands unless, or if they have lost anybody. And you have not lost anybody, that may make it a little bit difficult, but still the possibility of pulling this off on turn 1 and it being a score immediately card makes this very strong. I'd be interested to see how this is affected by the meta. We know in the past round of the meta, Stormcast and Orcs have really taken away the top levels of tournament play. But with all the new cards, we may see a resurgence in some of the more horde-oriented warbands. The efficacy of this card is going to be based entirely on what the meta is doing right now. But in any case, with this particular faction, having them adjacent to the enemy, you're going to want to do that anyway. It's synergistic with your inspiration mechanic. It's synergistic with everything that your faction does. Great card. Moving right along. Bane of Champions. Score this immediately if Riptooth, that's the dog, takes an enemy leader out of action. 2 glory points. I love it. I love it for so many reasons. I love it 1,000 times. I love it because it's 2 glory points. I love it because it's score immediately. And mostly I like it because it's based on Riptooth, which I constantly feel is the best figure in this warband. And because he's so fast, because he does so much damage, it can be a cruise missile going directly towards the enemy leader. I can definitely see basing my entire strategy around this card. I want to engineer a situation in which the other Blood Warriors set up the pin, that being the enemy leader, give him a little bit of damage, and then knock him down with Riptooth. Yeah, again, excellent card. That's 2 for 2 on excellent score immediately objectives. for Magore's Fiends. So we're off to a strong start. Going forward, Bloody Annihilation. Okay, so we saw the same card but with a different title. In the Farstriders expansion, it's score this in an end phase, any end phase. If all enemy fighters have been taken out of action, 3 glory points. I have the same problems with this that I had with the Farstriders one. You know, if you manage to take all of your enemy fighters out of action in turn 1 or 2, you've basically already won. This is a win more card, only useful in situations where, for example, tournament formats where you need to score as many glory points in each game as possible. And even if I were going to design a strategy around pulling off a second turn table, I would rather take total annihilation than this. Yes, this also works in the third end phase, which total annihilation does not, which means it synergizes well with regular annihilation, which that's a hilarious sentence that I have managed to say as a result of playing this game, so it's all worth it. So yeah, if I don't manage to kill everybody in turn 2, then I can combo this in with Annihilation for 8 glory points, which is okay. Again, though, Annihilation is already hard to pull off. I wouldn't want to overcommit to it. And at that same time, yeah, if I was playing Orcs, I could see overcommitting to an Annihilation strategy, maybe even Liberators. Blood Warriors do better damage than the Farstriders, but they don't do a lot without some very careful play. For this to really be effective, you're going to have to build your whole deck around this and its other annihilatory cousins. It's okay. So right now we've got 2 clear winners and 1 okay card. Next one. Khorne Sees Us. Score this immediately. Yes! Score this immediately if your warband takes 2 or more enemy fighters out of action in a phase. 1 glory point. Okay. Taking 1 enemy fighter out of action, very doable. Taking 2 out of action in a phase, yeah, if you just want to completely steamroll your opponent, if you can pull this off. So yeah, let's say you have a really good turn 1 or 2. You manage to take out 2 enemy fighters, that's 2 glory, plus this, 3, plus you probably have other score immediately cards, and almost all of those are based on some amount of violence. So yeah, this can set you up for an early game, really strong head start, plus the kind of board position that you're going to create from killing 2 of your opponent's enemy fighters. This is going to be real easy to pull off against any faction that has chaff, such as Blood Reavers, Spiteclaw Swarm, or the Sepulchral Guard. It's going to be much more difficult and possibly, yes, less useful against any flavor of Stormcast, other Blood Warrior warbands, or even Ironjaws. So yeah, again, it's okay, probably on the high side of okayed, or okay and verging on awesome. Alright, next card. Kill again. Okay, score this in an end phase if at least 2 fighters from each warband are out of action. Okay, that's going to be pretty rough. Keep in mind you have a 4-person warband and you cannot resurrect your units. At least at this point in the game. If you are in this situation in turn 1, you may have lost already. It's going to be very difficult since individually Magore's Fiends don't do a tremendous amount of damage. Losing half of your warband is going to be very painful. Yeah, you've killed 2 of the opponent's warband, but really, that just means this card has a lot of moving parts. And it's a lot of moving parts on an end phase card, not a score immediately card, an end phase card for 1 glory point. I don't like it. This is my first disappointment in this set. Everything else has been great. I see this as kind of a trap card. Great title, though. Khorne is always going to have questionable gameplay efficacy, but incredibly awesome names and titles. Alright, No Escape. Score this immediately. Oh, yeah. If 3 or more of your fighters made a charge action in this phase. Okay, so Orcs have this, Stormcast Liberators have this, Blood Reavers have this. It's good for all of them. You are going to want to charge into combat in your first couple of turns. You may even pull this off every turn, but it's a score immediately 1 glory for something that you were going to do anyway. I don't see a reason not to take this. Again, though, as I've said many times, I don't believe in auto-includes. This one gets close, though. Downside of this. Again, you have 4 fighters. You have 4 activations. To pull this off, you definitely have to spend 3 of them on charges. This means that you are going to have fewer options on what you can choose to do in the game, and you're probably going to want to make sure that your first 3 activations are those charges so that you can cycle this card out and get a new objective card in your hand in time for that first or second end phase. So yeah, that being said, I wouldn't worry too much about being predictable because I think your opponent is already going to predict that you are going to charge him because you are playing Khorne Blood Warriors. I don't see a lot. There are downsides to this card. I don't see them as being particularly relevant. Rivers of Blood. Score this in an end phase if all surviving fighters, at least 4, are wounded. You know, 1 expansion ago, I would not have thought this was a great card. It's 2 glory, which is cool. It's an end phase, so that works for me. I like for all of my any end phase cards to try to be around 2, 3 glory. But yeah, the reason why, again, for this series, I don't do a lot of research before I immediately look at the cards. That being said, a lot of this was already spoiled in the Warhammer community articles, but we know that Shard Gale exists, which is going to damage everybody on the field. And that's the part where this card would have been much more difficult to use earlier because it's all of your fighters and all of the opponent's fighters. This synergizes well with a couple other cards that have a similar feel or flavor to them, or a theme, you might say. This is as simple as you get this if you also happen to play Shard Gale within your last turn, unless somebody else has a card to counter that. So yeah, good value add. Even if you didn't have Shard Gale, the sheer tendency of this particular faction to toss out little bits of 1 damage go a long way. So yeah, definitely a strong inclusion at this point in the meta. Alright, Save the Best. Sometimes I wonder if GW is just taking the piss out of us with all of these titles, because I've noticed that a great number of the titles of cards in Shadespire happen to be 80s song titles. 80s and 90s song titles, I believe. In any case, love that picture on there. Severance Steelheart's eyebrow game is completely on point. Looks like Ryu from Street Fighter. Score this in an end phase if an enemy leader is the only surviving enemy fighter. Okay. Well, okay, so score this in an end phase for 2 glory points. I like it so far. An enemy leader is the only surviving enemy fighter. Okay, so this is going to be almost impossible to pull off against any of the factions that can resurrect units, Sepulchral Guard, Spike Claw, Swarm, because they're going to do everything in their power to make sure that the leader has some sort of backup in play. And as a matter of fact, against those factions, you're typically going to be going after the leader to begin with. Also, keep in mind that this particular objective directly invalidates Bane of Champions, or Bane of Champions invalidates it, the one of the better objectives that we've seen right off the bat. All that being said, if you're playing against Fire Slayers, Magore's Fiends, Stormcast Liberators, Farstriders, Iron Jaws, typically your enemy leader is going to be the most difficult to kill anyway. So if you're going for an Annihilation themed deck, this might be a good way to do it. Possibly taking out all of the minions in turn 1 or 2, then scoring this, and then moving on to go for an Annihilation win. Yeah, I could see doing this against Liberators. Take out Angharad, take out Oberyn, leave Severin standing there with his douchey face, and then go in and charge against him in turn 3. But given that the other factional objectives that we've seen so far are so great, we got kind of an embarrassment of riches here. Which makes it a little bit more difficult to carve out a space for this particular objective in a faction deck. It's just okay, and in fact I think this may be the okayest card that we've seen so far. It's right there in the middle. Final card, Show of Strength. Score this immediately. Excellent. If your leader takes an enemy fighter out of action. Okay, so there's another card like this you can double up with. It doesn't have to be any particular enemy fighter. So you can go have Magore go beat up somebody's chaff, and you will get 2 glory out of the occasion. 1 for killing them, 1 for score immediately. Then you get to cycle in a new card. Excellent way to round out this series. Downside, not much. It's only 1 glory point. It requires you to do something with your leader, but if you're not doing anything with your leader, then it's kind of a waste. It's worth mentioning that of all the leaders in Shadespire at the current point, Magore's probably the least effective overall. He doesn't do a lot of damage. He's a little tougher than Garrick. Of course, we have not gone through all of Magore's unique upgrades, so that one remains to be seen. I'm going to reserve judgment on this one, but those are all 9 of the unique factional objectives for Magore's Fiends. I'm very interested in what all of you think. Please feel free to comment below and let me know if you agree, disagree, what your thoughts are upon seeing these cards for the first time, or if you've gotten a chance to play with some of these. I'd love to know how your games went on and how much success or lack of success you had with them. In the meantime, please like, share, and subscribe this video to help us bring you more content, and we'll see you in either the next video in this series, which will be the factional upgrades for Magore's Fiends, or the next video chronologically, which will be the factional upgrades for Farstriders. In the meantime, have a great one.